Hi everyone, and welcome back to Leah Binges, because my name is Leah and I like to binge watch a lot of movies and TV shows. And today I want to talk about the final season of You, which is season 5, which recently premiered. I always thought that that was such a weird title for a TV show, because every time someone would be like, oh, what are you watching right now? You're like, You, and it sounds so ominous. But anyway, moving on. Another side note about this video is that I know the lighting is gonna suck, and I just genuinely can't do anything about that because it is totally raining outside right now. And I typically use natural light for my videos, but I can't because it's so dark and gloomy and rainy outside. But I also genuinely need to film today, so I can't do anything about the lighting. I'm sorry about that. But without further ado, let's just jump into it. Going into this season, I didn't really know what to expect, honestly. I feel like I've been saying this a lot in my videos, but it's genuinely true. I didn't see really any ads or trailers for this final season, which I thought was weird. Like, I felt like they didn't put any money into marketing, but maybe that's just me for some reason. Maybe they did and it just didn't reach me. And I also did not enjoy season 4, like, at all. I saw a bunch of people calling the plot twist from like episode 1. I know it sort of made sense for Joe to descend into madness and deal with some sort of mental split, but it just felt very disconnected from the previous season. Like, if I was gonna see him descend into madness, I would like a slow descent and kind of like have breaks in his psyche leading up to like a full-on mental split, if that makes sense. But they didn't do that. They just kind of threw him into that season, and like they wanted the twist to be that like, oh, it was him all along, but that the writing just kind of sucked, like in my own opinion. But I did end up watching season 5 because season 4 wasn't bad enough for me to give the show up altogether. And seeing as it was the final season and the ending of the show, I did just really want to see it, because it takes a lot for me to give up on shows, especially when it's their final season. Like, I might as well just finish it off and see how it goes. But despite the fact that I didn't really know what to expect and kind of had low expectations, I did end up really enjoying the season. I felt like it had more of a vibe from the first 3 seasons, which is obviously what people have enjoyed in the past, including myself. And I will throw this out there now. I feel like later on in this video, I'm going to tear the show apart. And that, I feel like, comes from the fact that I've seen so much online tearing the show apart. And then like I start to think about it more and more, and I'm like, oh, that actually does make a whole lot of sense. Why didn't I think of that? And oh wait, maybe it wasn't that good, blah, blah, blah. But like overall, watching the show my first time, like watching the final season my first time with no one else's opinions, I really enjoyed it. I'm typically not the person that when I'm watching a show by myself, I am not very good at tearing it apart like bit by bit and being like, oh, well, this didn't make sense, and well, that scene. I just go on vibes of, well, I enjoyed the overall season, or I enjoyed the overall show and the experience of watching it. So I just go on that and kind of ignore the rest. So just throwing it out there that overall, I did really enjoy this final season. When Bronte, who was the main kind of love interest for the final season, when she was first introduced, she was like the spitting image of Beck for the first couple episodes, in my opinion, which obviously is his type, and it reminded me so much of season 1. I did really, really enjoy the twist that she was catfishing him. I know a lot of people saw it coming, and I saw people calling it like a couple episodes ahead of time. They're like, oh, something is up with her. She's obviously playing him and blah, blah, blah. But like, I didn't really see that coming. Like, and I really liked the twist. Like, obviously, he's so cocky, and we've seen him be so sure of himself for so many seasons that it's kind of nice to see him get taken down a peg. But I also wish they did more with that twist. It felt a little bit like they had that twist and then it immediately fell off and lost its steam for the last couple episodes, which was a little disappointing because they had this big reveal and it was like, oh, shocking twist. And then the last couple episodes really lost me, I'm not gonna lie. I will also get more into this later though. Why was Bronte like this is supposed to be the pros, and I'm like getting into the cons already. But why the heck was Bronte so obsessed with Beck? Like I said, she was like the spitting image of Beck. She was clearly trying to be her in the first couple episodes. And why was she so obsessed? We only saw Beck help her with her writing like once, and now all of a sudden they're acting like they're best friends, and Bronte is some genius who could decipher Beck's book and tell that some of it wasn't written by her. I thought that was really crazy. I'm like, that's a really weird thing for you to include when we never really saw them be friends. It just was weird. She's like sitting in her bed reading the book like, this doesn't sound like Beck. How would you know? You met the girl like once. That's crazy work. I also have seen a lot of people tearing Bronte apart for the way that she defended Jo after the twist came, but it made total sense in my mind for the context of the show. If you're gonna set Jo up as like this charming guy who's like a master manipulator of women, then it makes sense for even someone who goes in suspecting him of being a killer, of course she's gonna be able to be manipulated by him because you've set him up as being a manipulator. So like it made sense. I don't know why people hated on Bronte so much for that when it made total sense. Not to mention the fact that Bronte and her friends had set up this entire storyline that Clayton was a threat to her and that he was dangerous. So like it made sense. It of course made sense in her mind that like, oh, he was defending me because he thought that Clayton was a killer and like we set that up. Of course, like Jo was gonna defend me or whatever. Anyway, not saying that he was justified personally. I'm just saying that like it made total sense in the context of the show for her to have that realization of like, oh, maybe we weren't totally in the right and maybe like Jo was justified. So I just think she got way too much hate for that. I do also want to applaud the actors and their performances, especially Penn Badgley and Anna Camp. I will always defend and applaud an actor who has to play multiple characters in one show, like such as Dove Cameron with Liv and Maddie or Nina Dobrev in The Vampire Diaries. I just think it's so interesting getting to see a person play multiple people in one show, especially when people are so different, like total opposites. It's like so fun to see the juxtaposition between the two of them, but being played by the same person. Especially the scene where Anna Camp is like pretending to be both of them at once, and she's like having to switch back and forth, and then like she's like kind of losing her mind as Maddie. I love that performance. So much fun. I really loved getting to see her do that, especially considering the fact that I've only ever seen Anna Camp in Pitch Perfect. And so it was such a big difference, and watching her lose her mind was just so great. And I thought the performance was really good. So I just wanted to give her a little shout out. Penn Badgley as well, like the scene where Jo is talking to his son and his son finally like calls him a monster and like tears him down. I also thought that performance was really good because Penn Badgley put his all into that. But also side note with that, I thought it would be so funny to be on set and having to film almost every scene a million times between the monologue and then the twins. You have to film it multiple times because you need to get Anna Camp in both of the characters and all those shots, but then you also need to film it a bunch of times for Jo's monologue. Like I know behind the scenes, it flows really well with like having stand-ins and having someone off screen read the monologue so things flow nicely. So like obviously I know how things work behind the scenes, that like it probably works out. But at the same time, I just think it would be funny being like, okay, next one. Oh wait, now we need the monologue. And like, there's probably just a lot of like silence and weird angles of them not being able to put things together. My next like point that I think was good was that it did have a relatively satisfying finale. I definitely will be tearing the finale apart a little bit later, but like upon my first watch, I was like, well, of course it makes sense for Jo to be stopped. And I know that we've been leading up to Jo being stopped. So it made total sense in my mind that Jo had to be stopped one way or another. That's what the show has been setting up and what the actors have definitely been setting up. Like I know Penn Badgley hates Jo with his whole heart and wants to see him be punished. So it made total sense. But I wish we got to see more of the trial and the aftermath. Like the final episode felt a little bit rushed through, and it focused way too much on Bronte when Jo is meant to be the main character. I organized my thoughts and I know this video is gonna be so disconnected and like have me talking in circles a lot, even though I tried to like write down my thoughts and organize them in some sort of way. And I do apologize for that because I will be talking about this more later. And like, I don't mean to bash the actress for Bronte. I don't mean to bash her at all. And I also am very conflicted about the finale. Like, it was satisfying, but then I also have my gripes with it. So I'm gonna go back and forth. So I'm sorry about that. But so overall, on my first watch with no outside perspective, I did enjoy the final season altogether because it had the season 1 vibes and overall had the feel of the show again. Like, I feel like season 4 was a completely different show. So coming back to season 5, it was really enjoyable. I liked that they kind of course corrected from season 4 and it had a decent conclusion overall. So those are my like good thoughts on this season. Now we're gonna move on to the bad things. And I feel like I already kind of touched on some things, which makes it sound like I didn't enjoy this season, but I really did. I promise you I did. I'm just like, I start complaining about something and then I start spiraling into complaints. And I'm sorry about that. But so overall, my complaint is that parts of this season did not make a whole lot of sense. Like, how the heck did Bronte survive all of that in the finale? Like, she got shot, she had a sprained ankle, she had been strangled and drowned, and all of a sudden she's alive and totally fine. She's running around the woods with a gun. Like, girl is superhuman, apparently. Same with Kate. Like, she was shot and was dying in the basement of the bookstore with a fire. And all of a sudden, in the finale, she was fine with some burns. Who rescued her? Did she rescue herself? Because last time we saw her, she was like passed out. So what are we supposed to believe, that she woke back up and crawled out of the basement and is like dying of smoke inhalation and blood loss? And like, girl should not have survived. I'm sorry. Like, realistically, she should not have survived being shot and dying in that fire. Doesn't make any sense. On the same thought of like things not making sense, why was it that Bronte was the one that took Joe down? I know she had a lot of planning for the most part and she had friends on the outside that were helping her, but so did Candace in season 2. She also had a whole lot of planning and Joe tried to kill her. So like, she had more motivation and was more prepped going in. I know that Love was the one who killed her and not Joe, but like, she just made more sense to be the one to take him down. There were so many other people who would have made sense to take him down that Bronte was not one of them. Like, sorry, but realistically, after all the people Joe has killed, as well as his blind rage that we've seen in the past, he should have been able to kill Bronte in the finale. Not saying at all that I wanted her to die, because I did not want her to die. I didn't want Joe to keep killing. Let's get that out there now, okay? But also realistically, within the knowledge and the character writing that we've seen in the past, it made no sense. And like, it just was not consistent with Joe's character at all, that he's been so kind of violent and strong, like physically. Like I said, he gets in these blind rages and then he just like can't stop himself and is like pretty violent when he's in those. So it just didn't make any sense that she didn't get killed in that one-on-one kind of like confrontation between the two of them. Even with Bronte having the gun pointed at Joe, we've seen him be such a manipulator that it seems like in previous seasons, if he was in that point, he still would have been able to talk himself out of it and still manipulate her into believing what he wanted her to believe. And yet it seemed like he didn't even really try to talk her down. He just was like, oh, okay, you have a gun on me. That's it. We're done. I'm defeated. It was weird. It didn't follow with what we know. Plus, it also just sucked seeing a new character take him down when there are other people from his past that could have. I know Jenna Ortega is busy and like couldn't come back, but like Ellie could have come back to try and take him down. Or Love and 40's mom, like she has all these resources at her disposal and she already thinks that he killed both of them. So why isn't she the one investigating him and trying to take him down? Or even could have been a cop that's been on his trail for a while and like collecting evidence, like from season 1 when he like left the jar of pee at Peach's house. And that was like a pretty big plot hole that no one ever plugged. But like it could have come back to haunt him if we had like a cop that's been collecting all this evidence that he's been leaving behind. Especially if it was like the cop from season 2, was his name Henderson? Because like Delilah died and then he shot 40. He could have been the one who's like, oh, I can't really deal with what's been happening. Something doesn't sit right in my gut. And he could have been the one investigating everything. And that would have made so much more sense to me than Bronte just showing up and taking him down. Just overall, I felt like the season focused too much on Bronte for my liking, not in like an anti-feminist and the show's gone woke lens. I'm not saying it like that. I know plenty of people have said some crazy things about the season, and that's not what I'm trying to say. I just mean that like Joe has been the main character he is the main character of the show. And it felt like we didn't get that much screen time or character writing or development from him, especially like after we've built up his traumatic childhood over the past couple seasons. And even last season, they kind of had that rebirth of him. Like he jumped in the water, I think, and almost died, but then he got pulled out and he's like, oh yeah, I've been given a second chance and reborn. We could have done so many interesting things with that character after what happened to him in season 4. And they just didn't really do anything. He just kind of became a worse version of himself from season 1. We're lacking character writing. We're lacking the character development. I will also say, like, with the point of Joe's character writing, Alex Myers on YouTube made a very, very good point that I hadn't even thought about beforehand, but they had a perfect setup for this final season because of the fact that they've built up his traumatic childhood through the past couple seasons. Joe struggled with his own childhood and had a strained relationship with his mother. So now Joe is a dad himself and a parent himself. And they briefly kind of touched on the idea that maybe now his son is taking after him in like violence, because they had that episode where Henry like hit Reagan's daughter at school. And then Joe had to kind of deal with the fact of, oh, maybe this is like nature and not nurture. And like, since I'm violent, I'm like rubbing off on Henry. And like, maybe because I'm violent, my son's gonna be violent. And I don't want him to be like that. So we had this perfect setup of him trying to be a dad and navigate if he's now given this violent nature to his son and he really didn't want that for his son. We had this perfect setup. We could have had Joe being like, how do I give my son a better life? And how do I give my son a better upbringing than I had? It would have been like the perfect mirror image of the information that we already had as an audience, especially kind of considering that people have tended to get tired of the same kind of formulaic seasons that we've had already. I know people kind of said that about seasons 2 and 3. They were really glad that season 3 introduced love as like another killer, which I'll also talk about that later. But it threw like a different storyline into the mix, so it wasn't the same thing over and over again. And then as much as I did like that season 5 was similar to seasons 1 and 2, because it was kind of that formula, at the same time, after 5 seasons, you would think that they would come up with something a little bit better. And the parental role could have been that something better. Just my opinion. Again, I didn't really come up with that. Alex Myers did, which love his content, but just thought I'd reiterate that because it was a really good point. Continuing with the things made no sense and character writing kind of sucked, Kate also made no sense because at the end of season 4, I was under the impression that she knew everything that Joe had done and helped cover it up. Even at the beginning of season 5, she's like complaining about the guy at the party, and Joe kind of gets in his head and starts fantasizing about the ways that he could kill the guy that's bothering Kate. And Kate kind of pulls him out of it. And I kind of thought that was an indication that like, oh, he's happy in his marriage. She knows everything. She's kind of pulling him out of his killer fantasy land. And he is like super happy in that situation. Even that same episode or the next episode, Kate asks Joe to kill Uncle Bob. But then all of a sudden the character writing switches up and Kate switches up and she's like decides that she's gonna take Joe down. There's a scene later on in the season where she finds everything out and she's like totally horrified about the information that she learns. But I was totally confused about that because they were happy for 3 years according to the show, and now we're gonna flip, and that kind of contradicts what I thought we had going at the end of season 4. So I just was confused, and that seemed very inconsistent with the information that we already had about Kate. This was partially a problem for me because he's been looking all this time for someone to accept him, and Kate finally did, and then she just took it back, and I feel like the writers didn't really know what they were doing with that. And it also kind of goes to my previous point that the beginning of the season is set up totally happy with the family, with Kate, Joe, and Henry being a family, and it could have set up great family drama and dynamics with Henry and Joe struggling to be a good father, but instead they just switched to doing the same thing that they've done. This also still could have ended, if they had kept it to be a family, it still could have ended with Joe's past coming back to haunt him because of the fact that Kate covered things up and things were left unanswered in the previous seasons. He still could have ended up in jail, even if we didn't do all this Bronte stuff. Like I previously said, one good detective could have been collecting all this evidence, like maybe the cop from season 2, and then we could have had a time jump where he's moved on, he's established with his son, and now his son's image of him has to comes crumbling down, leaving it open to if his son will become a monster himself or if he'll forge his own path, which is kind of what Dexter did in the spinoff. What is that? Dexter New Gen? Is that what it's called? Anyway, in the Dexter spinoff, they kind of do the same exact thing where they're like, oh, Dexter's been a monster, now he has his son, and then his son ends up shooting him because he decides he wants to forge his own path and not be the monster that Dexter's training him to be. That could have been a perfect setup for you as well, but they just didn't do that, and missed opportunity in my mind. Now on to point 4 or maybe 5 about inconsistent character writing. But season 1 and 2, Joe would have immediately started Googling every aspect of Bronte and Clayton's past and instantly discovered the relation to Dr. Nikki. Why was he not investigating things properly like he has in his past? In season 1 and 2, Joe is meticulous and he's very intelligent. That sounds stupid to say because I know a lot of people are like, oh, he's stupid. And he is kind of stupid. But at the same time, he is diligent in investigating the people that he's obsessed with. As soon as he met Love, he was creating Instagram accounts to follow her on everything and did all this investigation about her previous relationships and her past. And with Beck too, he was following her everywhere to learn everything about her. And now in season 5, he just didn't seem to do any of the thorough investigation that he has done. And they didn't give me a good enough explanation as to why he wouldn't do that. Was it just supposed to be oh, he's learned, he's better now, he's gonna trust her? That's some bullshit if I ever heard it. I don't know why they would say that. Not to mention then, he wasn't able to run in season 1 or 2, but now he's an Olympic sprinter, which he could have been training if he learned his lesson, but I don't know, it was just weird. And then why did he hide the key in his arm? Did I miss something? Or did he have a reason to do that? But it felt oh, I trust Bronte, blah, blah, blah. So he didn't really have a reason to believe he'd be trapped in the box. Especially, he didn't even have a reason to believe he'd be trapped in the box and they would take all his keys. I know he's done in the previous seasons, oh, I learned when Mooney locked me in here, hide a spare key. You already had keys hidden. So why would you need to hide another one? I don't know. Weird character writing. I'm telling you, weird character writing. If I don't think about the season too much, that's when I'm oh, I enjoy it. But then the longer I think about it, the more I'm what is up with all these plot holes and inconsistent character writing? I'm y'all, get it together. Do you not know your own show? Why do I feel I know the show and your characters better than you do? All right, moving on from inconsistent character writing, the next really bad point that I have to make is that the ending was just so rushed. I did kind of like that we got to see Joe in prison and that he broke the fourth wall, calling people out who thirst over killers and stalkers and things like that. And it makes sense for the show, but not for the character. Like, he's been wanting people to idolize him for 5 seasons, and he wants people to love all parts of him. But then when he gets fan mail, like, all of a sudden he hates it. He should be relishing in the fact that people love all parts of him, not hate them. I was very confused about that. So maybe this is more character writing. Okay, I still went back to character writing somehow. But this has more to do with the ending. But so the end fight scene with Joe and Bronte was incredibly ridiculous for me. Apparently Bronte like shot off his penis, and I'm like, huh? Why did we do that? Why did we include that? That was weird. I didn't like that. Side note, I know I'm hating a lot on Bronte because I don't like the character writing, but absolutely no hate to the actress. I've seen people complaining about her looks and making fun of her and like calling her Rumpelstiltskin and things. And I just think that's so childish. The actress herself has already kind of spoken out about this, but like, you can hate the character without completely tearing down the actress. That's just so childish. Stop doing that. Okay, my last kind of downfall isn't necessarily about season 5 as it is like kind of the show as a whole and more the fandom, but the fandom slightly ruined the show for me a bit because people were in the comments of the finale still talking about Love and how much they miss her. And I've seen so many edits of people being like, oh my God, I was waiting for her to come back. Like, I miss her. I was waiting for her to come back. She died 2 seasons ago. Like, I know she brought a lot to the show that was needed at the time, but she was impulsive, and their dynamic between Joe and Love from season 3 was not a sustainable dynamic for the show at all. Like, Love kept killing people left and right with no thought or plan on like even how to get rid of the body. And I'm like, that's not a sustainable plot line for the show. You're instantly gonna get caught. I don't understand. But so people are still talking about her, and I'm like, maybe let's get over yourselves a little bit. Like, she died 2 seasons ago, and it's been very definitive that she's been dead all this time. I know they brought other people back, but I complained about that too. Just let it go. I'm sorry. She's dead. She's gone. Now the show's over, so you don't get to see her anymore. I liked her at the time, and she did bring a dynamic to the show, but like, we gotta let it go. And I still see people also talking about like, why did Joe have to ruin the show and ruin his life by killing Love because they were a perfect match. Sure, I know people loved Love when it comes to the show, but do people not understand the main character? Like, it kind of starts to drive me crazy when people are talking about how Joe ruined his life by killing Love. You clearly don't get the main character, I'm sorry. Like, he builds up the idea of women in his head as these like perfect and fragile beings, and then he thinks they're in need of protecting and in need of his protecting. But as soon as that image is broken and either the women turn on him or just do something that breaks that perfect and fragile image, he immediately loses interest and turns on them. Like, that's what he's done with every single other woman. I don't know why you thought that Love would be any different. So once the fantasy of Love was broken in Joe's mind at the reveal of season 2, he was never gonna look at her the same. Like, partially because he just didn't like seeing a woman who was not perfect in his mind, but he also would have never accepted the mirror image of himself, because he's always justifying his actions to himself and to the audience. He could never see himself as the monster. Not saying he's right or I agree with his actions, but I'm just getting frustrated at the double standard of people continuing to bring up how Joe ruined everything. Like, some people are not understanding the show. Like, he's always behaved the same, so it feels easy to follow. But people are still, like, talking about it in a way that, in my mind, I'm like, what are we talking about? Why are we not understanding? You can miss her, but at the same time, why are we saying that it ruined his life? Are we not following the character writing? Anyway. Okay, moving on to like this last section of the video. I know this is probably gonna be a long one, so bear with me. Okay. Last section of the video is the fact that I am overall very conflicted about the show and the ending as a whole. Because I've said this like 3 times already, but this is gonna be the 4th one. I am in no way defending or romanticizing this man. No one should wish for a man like Joe in their life, And I certainly do not. I'm not claiming this energy. I do not want a man like him in my life at all. And also, if we are talking real world, of course, Joe should be punished because he's a killer, he's a stalker, he's a manipulator, whatever. He should end up in jail or dead. We should seek some sort of justice or revenge or vindication for his actions in the real world, of course. Like any serial killer, murderer in the real world, victims deserve justice. Okay, let's get that out of the way. Obviously, that's what's right, and people should not be thirsting over murderers, stalkers, criminals, and real world villains just because you consider them hot, okay? Like, I'm trying to get that as clear as possible, especially considering, like, I could do a whole another, like, video essay about the fact that, like, Netflix is playing into this because they continue to make shows about murderers with conventionally hot actors as the killer. Like, they had Evan Peters playing Jeffrey Dahmer, and then people were like thirsting over him because it was Evan Peters, and I'm like, no, that's supposed to be Jeffrey Dahmer. Same with Zac Efron, also played Ted Bundy in a Netflix movie, and then people, again, were thirsting over him because he's Zac Efron, and it's like, no, that's supposed to be Ted Bundy. Same with Ross Lynch. I know Ross Lynch played a version of Jeffrey Dahmer as well, I believe. Like, stop casting these people because people already thirst over these actors and they're going to thirst over them more even if they're playing a terrible character. But that's besides the point. That's complete side note that I could do a whole other video about. And then it like humanizes these killers as well, which we should not be doing. But anyway, that's all real world stuff. That's moving on. So real world, he deserves to be punished. And I also know that Penn Badgley himself has talked about this because he personally hates Joe and wants him to burn in hell. And he criticizes people for finding him hot or loving him, which is totally understandable. Because again, I do not personally love this man, nor do I want a man like him. Let's get that clear right now. Do not throw that energy my way. However, here's where I'm conflicted. I found myself rooting for Joe in this show. Sorry, sue me. And obviously, I found myself rooting for Joe because the show is made that way. And I know some people are going to argue that the show's not made that way, but I would disagree. I think the show is made that way, whether they want to make it that way or not. It's made to root for Joe because Joe is the main character. He's the main character that you've been following since the beginning. You've been following him for 5 seasons, 5 years or more, probably. And he is the narrator, so the story follows with him. And it's going to be hard to root against your main character, no matter who it is. That's just my own personal opinion. And it's hard to root for the people who are trying to take your main character down, even if they are in the right. Yes, the women who were taking Joe down in season 5 were obviously in the right. But at the same time, you sit there thinking, oh, maybe Joe will get away because he's the main character and he's who you've been following and you care what happens to him. This also kind of like connects to The Last of Us as well, because I recently saw someone on TikTok talk about this with The Last of Us, like the game version at least, that the whole game is played through from the perspective of Joel. So like no matter what happens, you are playing as Joel and you're gonna root for him because he's your main character and he's who you have been following and getting the narration from. I wish I could find the of whoever said that because I would absolutely credit them, but I don't tend to like write things down when I see them. So sorry to whoever that was. I would credit you if I could find your TikTok again. Sorry. This is going back a little bit, but plenty of people also rooted for Love, and she was just as psychotic as Joe. Like if Love and Joe had worked out and lived out life as happy and just continuing to kill people together, I feel like they would have been praised a lot by the audience. So why is it only okay for them to be psychotic if they are psychotic killers together? Like if you've just Joe being a psychotic killer, somehow people are like, oh, that's bad, why are you idolizing him? But then people idolize Love, who's also a psychotic killer. And I'm just like, if you're gonna hate one, you have to hate both. Sorry. Maybe it's my own form of justice coming through. To that point though, also, I do love a point that I've seen that some people have made, which is that Joe is a master manipulator, so much so that he's been able to manipulate the audience themselves. I really like that point, honestly, because I think it's so interesting to talk about. Not to mention, I saw someone make the point that maybe even some of the people that Joe killed were completely innocent, but like considering Joe is an unreliable narrator and he justifies every killing to himself, he could be lying to the audience and to himself about his victims just to justify those killings. I think that would have been a really interesting turn of events. Like if like the final season was from like a different perspective and not Joe's. Like if it had been, this just came to mind. Like let's say it had been a cop from previous seasons that ended up taking him down. I would have liked to see it from the cop perspective. This would have been a great twist, actually. If we had seen the final season from the cop perspective and they have like that murder board, you know, that a lot of cop shows do, and it's all like his victims and blah, 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 and they're like picking it apart piece by piece, and it would let the audience see it from the other perspective. That would also make Joe look a lot more villainous, I feel like, because I also saw someone make a TikTok that was set up like a true crime documentary that had the conversation between Beck and Joe, and it was like so good because it made it seem so much more ominous and villainous seeing it from that perspective. So I kind of wish we got to see more of that in the show, like not just outside the show. That would have made it a lot easier to root against Joe, I feel like. Anyway, that's besides the point. But so one of the other reasons that I feel conflicted on whether or not I'm supposed to root against Joe or not is that there are so many other characters in media that people love and root for, even if they are killers or are like problematic characters, like Klaus and Kai from the Vampire Diaries and the originals, Damon and Stefan also from the Vampire Diaries, Dexter Morgan from Dexter, which I've mentioned before. I've literally recently seen Rumpelstiltskin Defenders, and that man is like one of the worst characters and worst people on any show I've ever watched in my life. Similar with like Regina. I know Regina's like a little bit more of a complex character than Rumpelstiltskin is on Once Upon a Time, but she still was like a murderer for like a long time. And people are still like, oh no, she's right. Matt Murdock / Daredevil, I know he's not a killer, but he definitely like has a darkness that he fights that we see in the show consistently. The Punisher, Joel, Rafe from Outer Banks. Not me personally, and I know this one is also still a bit controversial, but like I've seen plenty of people defend him. Oliver Queen in the beginning of Arrow was a murderer, basically, and the show was actually kind of better when he was like the vigilante rather than a superhero. That's a conversation for another time, though. Mickey from Shameless, Hannibal from Hannibal, Loki, the main characters of Dead to Me and Big Little Lies, the main characters of 13 Reasons Why, literally covered up a murder in season 3. Well, actually, one of them did a murder, and then the rest of them covered it up. Same with like Elite, I think. The main characters basically killed someone, and then they also covered it up. The main characters of Money Heist are criminals. The main characters of Why Women Kill, the 100 main characters are constantly killing people. Even like Harvey and Mike from Suits, I know they're not murderers, but they're still technically criminals throughout that entire show, and like no one cares. I know not all of these are the same exact circumstances, but it just goes to show that people have loved problematic people in the past because this is TV, this is fiction. Now, if you're someone who hates all of these characters for their actions, then I applaud you and your ethics. But like, I slightly feel like there's a double standard sometimes. You can argue that there are different circumstances for some of these characters, but not all of them. And I'm just trying to point out kind of the hypocrisy that people will like attack Joe defenders with their life as if Joe himself is a real person and real killer. Like if we're talking about someone like Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy, they are real serial killers. So like obviously we should not be idolizing them or anything. And I totally agree with that. But man's our main character and he's fictional. So like I'm just conflicted, okay? So overall, I half wanted the show to end with Joe arrested or dead because that would be the realistically satisfying thing for his character. But the other part of me wanted him to get away because we've invested these 5 seasons and 5 years into this character for a show that is written for you to root for him, in my opinion. Like, why else would you bother watching if you didn't care what happened to your main character? Maybe that's just me, but like, I don't know. Maybe you could argue that you bothered watching because you wanted to see him get taken down. I don't know. That seems like a long time to watch a show that you're just waiting to see him be destroyed or whatever. I don't know. Like, I half think that season 3 may have been a better place to end because it had Joe presumed dead / on the run, but it's like left up to the interpretation of the audience on where the show went from there. I don't really have anything else to say about that. Either way, I would still argue that the ending was rushed and poorly done because the finale started focusing more on Bronte, and I'd rather see more of Joe's downfall and like the trial. Like, we could have had a whole episode or 2 just focused on the trial and hear like Joe's internal narration through that whole process. And that was such a missed opportunity in my opinion. So basically that's all, honestly. I never really know how to end these videos if I'm being honest, so I just kind of trail off until my thoughts are done. I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from with the whole, like, I'm conflicted how the show ended, because yes, I wanted to see him taken down, but also at the same time, I didn't want to see him taken down, and I don't know how to feel about that. Feel free to leave your thoughts and opinions on the show as a whole or the final season in the comments down below. I would love to hear what you guys have to say as well, especially on this last portion. Like, if you agree or disagree, please be cordial, but like, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions, honestly. So please feel free to leave those in the comment section down below. If there's a different show that you would like to see me watch and talk about, also feel free to leave that in the comments down below. Please feel free to give this video a like if you did enjoy my rant about the final season of You. I know this was probably a long one, so thank you so much for sticking with me on it. It also probably will be very delayed because it's gonna require editing, and I kind of hate editing, I'm not gonna lie. Also, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to check out any of my other videos that I've posted, or subscribe to follow along on my beginning YouTube journey. Thank you so much for watching, and bye.